Good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, September 1st, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Before we begin, these are the stories we're following at the top of the hour. South Korea reports more than 2,000 new COVID-19 infections Wednesday as the weekend effect fades. Meanwhile, authorities say 57% of the nation's population have received their first dose of a vaccine. U.S. President Joe Biden defended his decision to end the 20-year war in Afghanistan, rejecting criticism that the withdrawal was mishandled. South Korea's top nuclear envoy Noh Kyu-duk, who met with his U.S. counterpart this week, said the United States remains strongly committed to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula through diplomacy and dialogue, and is working closely with Seoul to bring Pyongyang back to dialogue. We begin with the COVID-19 situation. South Korea's daily caseload topped 2,000 for the first time in a week. Surges are usually seen on Wednesdays as slow testing over the weekend is no longer a factor, and the number is viewed as a clearer reflection of the current conditions. For more on this, we have our Kim Do-yeon standing by at the News Center. Do-yeon, give us the latest.
Mo-gyan, South Korea reported 2,025 cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday, of which 33 were locally transmitted. A spike is generally expected on Wednesday, as you said, with number not impacted by slower testing over the weekend. It's 653 more cases than yesterday. However, compared to a week earlier, it is down more than 100, which could pose as a good sign. In fact, the R0 number dropped below 1 for the first time in 2 weeks at 0.99. As for the social distancing measures imposed on the country, authorities will announce on Friday if there are any updates or changes to the distancing rules, with current measures set to expire this Sunday. In addition, they will also give more details on the special virus prevention measure to be imposed during Chuseok holidays, which come in late September. For now, they said that additional testing centers will open at train stations and terminals temporarily for people traveling for the holidays. Vaccinated people from South Korea will now be able to travel to Italy without having to quarantine. On Tuesday, South Korea, along with 20 other countries, were newly added to Italy's list of so-called Green Pass countries that are deemed to be relatively safe. It means they'll be exempt from Italy's mandatory 5-day quarantine. The passengers only need proof of negative COVID-19 results taken at most 72 hours prior to departure. One thing to keep in mind is this only applies to those who received a vaccine approved by the European Medicines Agency, either Pfizer's, Moderna's, AstraZeneca's, or Janssen's.
Now, Do-yeon, moving elsewhere, the European Union just reached its goal of vaccinating 70% of its adults. What does this mean, and how were they able to reach this point?
That's right, Mo-gyan. 70% of the adult population means at least 250 million people have been vaccinated in the bloc. Reaching this point by September had been the goal for the EU since the rollout of the vaccine. First, let's take a listen to what Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had to say.
But the pandemic is not over, and we must remain vigilant. So first of all, we need many more Europeans to vaccinate rapidly, to avoid a new wave of infections and to stop the emergence of new variants. And I call on everyone who can to get vaccinated. This is the only way to protect yourself and the others.
This is an overall average across the bloc and doesn't mean that each member state has passed that point. For example, Malta has the highest vaccination rate with 90% of its adults inoculated, with Ireland and Portugal at over 80%. But as we move to the east, Bulgaria has just a fifth of its nation's adults vaccinated, while Romania has about 30%. So there are some differences among the EU member countries. The Commission President also added that the EU has been a leading contributor to the COVAX facility to help low to middle income countries obtain vaccines, as the pandemic will only end when it's defeated in every corner of the globe. According to a research done in Belgium, Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine makes more than twice as many antibodies as Pfizer's. The results were published on the Journal of American Medical Association website on Monday. The study involved a group of 1,600 people whose blood samples were analyzed 6 to 10 weeks after their second doses. Antibodies are known to be a key component of a human body's immune response, but the study didn't examine whether more antibodies meant a longer period of immunity before waning. Both Moderna and Pfizer's mRNA vaccines have reported more than 90% effectiveness during the third phase of the clinical trials.
South Korea's exports jumped in August from a year earlier, marking the 10th consecutive month of growth. The Ministry of Trade on Wednesday said exports last month amounted to $53.2 billion, an increase of almost 35% on year. This is the biggest on-year increase for any month of August. The double-digit export growth was largely due to strong demand for semiconductors, petrochemicals, and petroleum products. Imports climbed 44% on year to $51.5 billion, resulting in an overall trade surplus of more than $1.6 billion. Following the end of the two-decade-long war in Afghanistan, U.S. President Joe Biden said that he was not going to extend the forever war and fended off criticism in his speech at the White House. Our Hyundai has the story.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday, U.S. local time, defended his decision to end the 20-year war and rejected criticism that the withdrawal was mishandled. Saying it was the best available option, he said he was not going to extend this forever war and was not extending a forever exit.
It's time to end the war in Afghanistan.
Over criticism that he should have extended the August 31st deadline in order to withdraw every American from the country, he said his decision was not, quote, arbitrary.
Leaving August the 31st is not due to an arbitrary deadline. It was designed to save American lives.
He added that 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those who remain, there is no deadline, and the country is committed to getting them out if they want to go. He said that according to the State Department, about 200 Americans are still in Afghanistan. Biden also called a mission to evacuate more than 120,000 people in recent weeks an extraordinary success. Behind the success, there has been talk of a secret arrangement being made between the U.S. and the Taliban. Citing two defense officials, CNN reported Tuesday local time that members of the Taliban escorted Americans to gates of Kabul airport in a secret arrangement made with the U.S. military. One of the officials told CNN that U.S. Special Operations Forces set up a so-called secret gate at the airport and even had call centers to guide Americans through the evacuation process. The officials said Americans were notified in advance to gather at muster points close to the airport, where the Taliban would check their credentials and take them a short distance to a gate secured by American forces, who let them inside through huge crowds of Afghans seeking to flee. One of the sources also said that these escort missions happen several times a day. 배은지, Arirang News.
European Justice and Home Affairs ministers have been discussing the Afghanistan refugee crisis, vowing to exert joint efforts to prevent a repeat of the 2015 migration crisis fueled by the civil war in Syria. Meeting in Brussels Tuesday, they agreed the EU will prevent a recurrence of uncontrolled, large-scale and illegal migration movements that the bloc was witnessed in the past. The EU is likely to provide funding to house refugees in countries that share borders with Afghanistan to prevent them coming to Europe. Seoul's chief nuclear negotiator says the U.S. firmly maintains a creative, flexible, and open stance toward resuming dialogue with North Korea. Do Kyu-duk was speaking to reporters in Washington on Tuesday, adding the U.S. is aware of the urgency of the North's nuclear issues. He's talked with the U.S. about cooperation over humanitarian aid for the North and said South Korea and the U.S. are fully ready to work with Pyongyang if it responds to the offer. During his visit to Washington, Do met several U.S. officials, including his counterpart Sung Kim and the White House's chief Asia advisor Kurt Campbell. Do is likely to meet Kim again in the near future. A new draft bill on the U.S. defense budget does not specify a lower limit for the number of American troops stationed in South Korea. The Biden administration has no such plans. U.S. Congress prohibited the use of the defense budget to reduce USFK size for 3 straight years through its annual National Defense Authorization Act. But according to VOA, the draft NDAA for the 2022 fiscal year does not have such a clause. Some expressed concerns of a possible reduction of troops here in the nation. Sources similar with Congress highlighted the clause was added to prevent the Trump administration from reducing troop numbers. South Korea has become just the 14th country in the world to make into law its carbon neutrality goal, as the National Assembly passed the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth on Tuesday. Our Kim Hyo-sun has more.
South Korean lawmakers on Tuesday passed the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, one that's expected to serve as a basis for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The legislature stipulates the goal of cutting emissions in 2030 by 35% or more from 2018 levels. The 2030 reduction goal is dubbed internationally as a Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, which indicates each country's efforts to slash emissions in accordance with the 2015 Paris Agreement. This makes South Korea the 14th country to legislate a Carbon Neutrality Act. The act also provides legal backing for the country's Presidential Committee on Carbon Neutrality that was launched in May. Local business circles have expressed concerns over the legislature, saying it does not fully reflect their opinions. South Korea's 5 major business organizations, including the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Korea International Trade Association, have pointed out that South Korea has a lot of manufacturing industries compared to many other advanced countries. While acknowledging the 2050 carbon neutrality goal is an inevitable global vision going forward, they also urge the government to lay out specific goals and strategies by sufficiently reflecting the short period of time Korea has to achieve its goal. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
A mother whose son died in surgery has been calling for a legal change to require hospitals to install surveillance cameras to prevent deaths from medical malpractice. Finally, the law, which people are calling the Kwon Dae-hee law after her son, has been officially passed by South Korea's parliament. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Lee Na-geum has been calling for surveillance cameras to be mandatory in hospital operating theaters. Her lonely battle began 5 years ago when her son died due to excessive bleeding during plastic surgery. Yi says the medical malpractice that led to her son's death wouldn't have been proven in court if it weren't for CCTV footage.
I broke down the footage into each second to make a timeline, like who went in and out and what they did. And I found out a nurse's aide did the procedure as the surgeon left. Critical evidence that judges could not deny.
Yi's son Kwon Dae-hee was operated on by so-called ghost surgeons, staff often unqualified, substituting for doctors so that multiple procedures can be done at once. And Yi had to do more than just bringing criminal charges against those involved. She demanded a change in the law.
While cleaning his things, I found my son's bucket list, and number 15 says, "Leaving my mark on the world with my name." It seemed like his last wish. And I felt like he left the CCTV footage as his bequest to help prevent further victims like him.
And so-called the Kwon Dae-hee law has been officially passed by lawmakers on Tuesday, making South Korea the first country to adopt such legislation. Under the law, hospitals are required to film procedures involving general anesthesia at the request of patients or their guardian. But there are several exceptions, like for emergency operations or procedures involving high risk. There will also be a 2-year grace period before the law is fully implemented. Patients Association largely welcomed the change, believing it could help prevent sexual assaults and medical malpractice. But doctors remain resistant, saying it infringes on their rights and harms doctor-patient trust. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Local medical staff say they're overworked and demand better working conditions in the pandemic. Unionized healthcare workers seem set to go on strike on Thursday after talks fell through with the government. The two sides have held 12 rounds of talks, and the Korean Health and Medical Workers Union, representing more than 56,000 nurses, pharmacists, and others, but not doctors, has demanded addition of more public hospitals and personnel. Many nurses have quit or taken leave as they burn out and are compensated too little for rigorous schedules. The nation's health minister urged they avoid a strike due to concerns over the burdened healthcare system. A conference to help connect Korean female leaders dotted around the world was held this week in Seoul, known as the Korean Women's International Network, or KOIN. This year marked its 20th anniversary. Our Min Soo-kyun went to check it out and files us this report.
Hundreds of Korean women from all walks of life gathered both online and offline to inspire and motivate others to lead.
When I see the successes of Korean and Korean diaspora women around the world, it makes me proud, not just because of our natural affinity, but because I know each woman has survived, thrived, failed, and succeeded through their own life's journey. We can all learn from each other that way.
The 20th Korean Women's International Network, organized by the Ministry of Gender, Equality and Family, invited some 300 Korean female leaders across 27 countries to join this year's conference held at the Plaza Hotel in Seoul. The two-day event from August 30th featured several panel discussions and networking opportunities. The topics discussed include the role of women in global health security.
Health security does not have clear boundaries, and since the world is connected, it's difficult to solve health issues without collective efforts. I hope more women step into healthcare-related industries and demonstrate their capabilities in ways that will add value to society.
Participants also discussed the impact of climate change on women, ways to increase their participation in the environmental sector, and approaches to ensure their safety. The Korean Women's International Network was established with the launch of the Ministry of Gender, Equality and Family in 2001, and this year marks the organization's 20th anniversary.
As KOIN celebrates its 20th anniversary, I hope Korean women, based on their experiences, will be able to jointly address the problems of the local and international community with their diverse and inclusive leadership.
For the past 20 years, KOIN has been a place for Korean women to share their experiences, connect, and increase female representation in leadership roles. So far, more than 9,000 women from 61 countries have taken part in the event. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motor Group and the American autonomous driving developer Motional have unveiled an image of its first Ioniq 5-based robotaxi. The vehicle, capable of operating without a driver, will be used in public ride services in the U.S. starting 2023. People will get a first look at the Ioniq 5 robotaxi at the IAA Mobility 2021 Motor Show in Munich, Germany next week. After sweeping the men's singles table tennis event at the Tokyo Paralympics the previous day, South Korea has also secured itself 3 medals in the team event. After all 3 Korean teams advanced to the semifinals on Tuesday, they're all guaranteed at least a bronze medal. However, since 3rd and 4th place teams both received bronze, South Korea is now guaranteed at least 3 medals. It gives them a chance at all 3 podium spots if 2 South Korean teams make it to the finals. Even before the official release, pre-orders for Blackpink Lisa's solo single album have set a fresh record. According to YG Entertainment, Tuesday, her single album La Lisa surpassed 700,000 pre-orders in just 4 days. This is by far the highest number recorded for a single album by a K-pop female solo artist. Orders poured in from home and abroad, including the US, China, Japan, and Europe. Pre-orders for Lisa's album that began last Thursday will run until its official release next Friday.
let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. We start things off in the United States, where the death toll from Hurricane Ida rose to at least 4 on Tuesday. 2 deaths were confirmed in Louisiana, including a person hit by a falling tree and a driver who drowned in New Orleans. Louisiana State Governor John Bel Edwards said at least 671 people had been rescued from floodwaters by Monday afternoon. According to a grid monitoring website, more than 1 million homes and businesses in Louisiana were without power on Tuesday. Another 75,000 were reported in Mississippi, Alabama, and Virginia. Governor Edwards warned that high temperatures are expected in the next 2 weeks, longer than what it will take for some areas to get electricity back. He added that historically, the majority of fatalities from major storms occur during the response, be it from heat exhaustion, motorists driving through floodwaters, or caused by carbon monoxide poisoning from portable generators. Meanwhile, the National Weather Service warned of heavy rain and a flooding threat to spread from the Tennessee and Ohio valleys up through the mid-Atlantic states on Wednesday. Over to Japan, where the government on Tuesday proposed a record level of defense spending for 2022. The Japanese Ministry of Defense is requesting nearly $50 billion starting in April 2022, an increase of 2.6% on year. If approved by the Finance Ministry and Japanese lawmakers later this year, the budget would be an all-time high, as well as the steepest increase in a decade. Included in the record budget bill is a plan to purchase a dozen U.S.-made F-35 fighters, as well as funding to develop the country's first new domestic fighter jet in 3 decades. Pundits say Japan's bill proposal comes as it tries to counter rising influence and aggression from China in the region. In comparison, Beijing plans to hike its defense spending next year by nearly 7%. And finally, we finish off in China, where the government has banned online gamers under the age of 18 from playing on weekdays, while limiting their playing time to just 3 hours most weekends. Starting this week, minors will only be allowed an hour of playtime between 8 and 9 p.m. on Friday, weekends, and public holidays. The latest measures represents an even tighter restriction than one set in 2019, where minors were allowed to play for 90 minutes on weekdays and 3 hours on weekends. Authorities say these restrictions were put in place to help prevent young people from becoming addicted to video games. However, others say the restriction comes as China continues to escalate its crackdown on the country's massive gaming industry. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. It's been raining heavily in central parts of the country since yesterday, dropping more than 100 millimeters. And right now, Jeollabuk-do province is being hit hardest, receiving about 30 millimeters an hour. In fact, Jeollado provinces and the rest of the central regions could see heavy rain into this afternoon, with up to 120 millimeters coming in showers. So rain advisory remains in place across central regions, while the rain warning in Chungcheong-namdo province has been lifted. But conditions will improve in the afternoon. Temperature-wise, highs will be slightly higher today, while parts of Jeju and Gyeongsang-namdo province remain under heat wave advisories, with highs to hover around 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon. And Seoul will be going up to 25 degrees Celsius. Southern regions and Jeju Island will be seeing rain into Friday, while more autumn monsoon rain is in the forecast next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that will do it for us at this hour on Arirang News. We'll be back with our next newscast at noon Korea time. Thank you for watching.